my admiration of the English seaside has always been as a visitor. Never really got my head around what it would be like to live there. And if you are familiar with resorts like Margate or to a lesser extent Ramsgate, because that's essentially a port rather than a resort, and then as you head north, certainly the most stark example would probably be Blackpool or the slightly more, or the considerably more gentrified and salubrious Lytham St Anne's. Head over to Weston-super-Mare. I love all these places, always have done, much sometimes to my wife's irritation, but the air of decline is palpable, and I missed this in the run-up to the referendum. I used to think to myself, why are all these seaside towns so staunchly pro-Brexit, like Clacton and Margate and all of these places? But when, you know, they must rely upon international trade. But of course, the average Joe on the streets of Clacton-on-Sea doesn't rely on international trade for his livelihood. He doesn't, unless you happen to have a job on the ferries, then you're not going to be that conscious of the fact. It's you know, you've got some fishing, of course, but that is for a variety of reasons, almost all of which are willfully misinterpreted by pro-Brexit campaigners. That's not going to affect many livelihoods at all. And I suddenly realised as I was strolling down the seafront in Margate and admiring, as is my wont, the legacy of the Victorian architecture, I suddenly realised you live your entire life in a sense of decline. You live your, and this isn't a criticism or far from it actually, it's an expression of heartfelt sympathy. If you live your entire life, and remember we're only there in the summer, we very, very rarely visit these places in the winter, and even in the summer, the word I would use is peeling, like paint. Everything is peeling. You've lived your whole life in a building where the paint is peeling and the windows are wonky. And you have this constant sense of your best days being behind you. Now, when people use the phrase metropolitan liberal elite, sorry, I know we're supposed to be talking about trains, but this is a live birth. When you use the phrase metropolitan liberal elite, I think you're describing people who are happy and fulfilled, and although they're aware of failings and flaws in the systems wherein they exist, they are at least slightly excited by the future. I think the future is getting less exciting or more worrying for all of us. And that's why we gravitate towards big cities. It's why kids like me move from Kidderminster to London, because we kind of have our eye on the future, our own future, and that transmutes into the national future. And I would never criticise or insult people who stayed in Kidderminster, far from it. It's, you know, it's my sister, it's my mum. But when I'm at the seaside, particularly with Brexit being so front and centre in our minds at the moment, those of us who care about the country, that there's a life lived, an entire life. You are born and raised in decline, in an area where you feel like the best days are behind you. And that's, I think, what got weaponised during the referendum. It's why that strange fella got voted in for UKIP in Clacton, Don Douglas Carswell, isn't it? It kind of harnessed this idea that the reason why you're living your life in decline is somehow the fault of immigrants or the European Union. I mean, it's a stone cold nonsense. But if you're trying to punt an ideological position that will shift even more power and wealth towards the kind of free marketeers, as it were, then it works. And so I mentioned this. I don't know if I'll do it as a topic, but I mention this because I feel that you were let down, actually, even though I think you voted to punch yourself in the face or to chop off the one remaining leg that you've got. I think people like me probably didn't really have a concept of what it would feel to grow up and to live your life in an environment where at every turn, you were reminded that things used to be better. So you look at the big Regency terraces in all of the popular English seaside resorts. You look at the big Regency terraces, you look at the old Victorian piers, you look even at the bus shelters, you know, the wrought iron bus shelters with ornate decoration on them. They're all falling apart, they're all peeling at the seams, but it just sends a message to you, wherever you turn in your hometown, that things used to be better. And that's why you look to the past rather than the future. And that's why the argument that things don't have to be like this is retrospective. We'll get our country back rather than we will embrace a brave new world. We will work together to create the best possible future.